The topic we're turning to next is, I believe, probably the single most important of those that we will discuss in the course of this program, this National Security Action Summit. For the simple reason that if we don't get the vulnerability of our electric grid fixed, we're not going to get to worry about the rest of those problems. This is the single most serious national security challenge the country is facing, I think. It's certainly the one that most of us know the least about. And it is a distinct privilege to be able to present to you in the course of the next hour and a half or so several of the country's truly preeminent authorities on the subject, people that I've had the privilege of working with who know this subject inside out, not only in terms of the various vulnerabilities that we face, the degree to which hostile powers, and for that matter, Mother Nature, might exploit these vulnerabilities to our unbelievable detriment. But there are also people who are knowledgeable about what to do about this problem. Unlike a lot of things that we'll talk about today and that I know were vexing to you all, this is something we can actually fix, provided we do it, and we do it before bad things happen. I'll tell you just a quick anecdote. A woman who's helping us put together this program in New Hampshire said she sat down with one of the presidential contenders, or expected presidential contenders, I won't mention his name, and had the opportunity to ask him, as I hope all of you will have shortly, what about the vulnerability of our electric grid? And this individual, whose name you know, said, I know it's a problem, but I don't know what to do about it. That is an unacceptable answer, and we're going to equip you now with what can be said if you do, in fact, get that response, and I hope you won't going forward, but if you do, in fact, get that response from elected officials or aspiring elected officials as they pass through Iowa in the days ahead, starting with Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. Peter is the Energizer Bunny incarnate. He is a man who has been working on this set of problems going back to his days as an analyst in the Central Intelligence Agency, where he worked for about 20 years, developing his expertise on questions of, well, our vulnerability to mass destruction weapons of various kinds. He worked on the staff of the House Armed Services Committee for a number of years and on the commission that was chartered by that committee and the Congress to look into specifically something called electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. He is truly the go-to guy on this issue, and I'm delighted to present him to you now. Peter Pry, welcome.
Thank you, Frank, for that generous introduction. And I congratulate this audience for not heading for the doors, because a topic that, like electric grid security, may sound like it's going to be the dullest thing you'll hear today. But I hope I may persuade you otherwise. Congressman King said earlier that law is what makes civilization, and he's correct about that. What's also necessary to our civilization, perhaps even more necessary than law, is electricity. We are an electronic civilization. Everything depends directly or indirectly upon the survival of our electric grid. All the critical infrastructures that sustain life and our economy depend directly or indirectly upon electricity. Without that, we have no communications, transportation systems won't work, industrial facilities won't work, the economy would collapse. Even food and water depend directly or indirectly upon electricity. The Congressional EMP Commission, on which I served, estimated that if we had a nationwide blackout that lasted 1 year, we could lose up to 90% of our population from starvation, disease, and societal collapse. And the briefing I have here is going to talk about, can you bring the briefing up, please? The briefing is going to talk about developments that have happened in the world over just the last 2 years, just over the last 2 years. Many of these things you will not have heard about in the newspapers. It doesn't receive enough attention. But the fact of the matter is we are facing a dire threat to our civilization because of our unprotected electric grid from both nature and man. Next view graph, please. Let's talk about the threat from the sun first, the threat from nature. One of the conclusions of the EMP Commission, was that Mother Nature can call what's called an electromagnetic pulse in the form of a geomagnetic storm. And we're concerned in particular about a geomagnetic superstorm. These rare phenomena happen about, once every century or so. The last and largest we know of was the 1859 Carrington event. And what happens is that this thing can call, what is an EMP? It's basically a super energetic radio wave that's so full of energy, while it passes harmlessly through your bodies, it will destroy electronics, everywhere within the location of the field. And in the case of a Carrington-class geomagnetic superstorm, the EMP would be everywhere, and it could collapse electric grids everywhere in the world, and as a consequence, put billions of lives at risk. While these things happen about once a century or so, we are overdue for a geomagnetic superstorm. A report by NASA issued in July 2014 said that in 2012, we missed the recurrence of a Carrington event by just 3 days. Such a storm crossed the path of the Earth, missing us by just 3 days. And they further estimated that I think the risk is 12% per decade. The likelihood of the recurrence of a Carrington-class geomagnetic storm is 12% per decade, which virtually guarantees within our lifetimes or that of our children, we will experience this catastrophic phenomena that can put the lives of billions of people at risk, including this country, which is the most advanced technologically and is therefore the most at risk because we are more dependent than most of the other countries in the world, any of the other countries in the world, on advanced technology. Next view graph. Let's talk about the threat from man. Let's talk about the threats from man that have occurred just over the past couple of years, since 2013. In 2013, we had the most serious nuclear crisis with North Korea that we ever faced. Dictator Kim Jong-un was threatening to make a nuclear missile strike against the United States. And in the course of that, this was in response to the Obama administration imposing additional sanctions to the United Nations for their third illegal nuclear test that occurred in February of 2013. In response to that, he started making nuclear missile threats against us. Next view graph. This picture here was of Kim Jong-un in his command post with his generals. In the midst of that nuclear crisis, they orbited a satellite over the United States. It went on a south polar trajectory, which is consistent with a method of making a surprise EMP attack that the Soviet Union invented during the Cold War. Because we have no ballistic missile early warning radars facing south and no interceptors facing south, so we can't defend ourselves against a warhead that is orbited like a satellite that comes at us from over the southern trajectory, over the South Pole. And that's exactly what they did with their KSM-3 satellite. And the graphic shows the track of the KSM-3 in the midst of that crisis. It passed over us several times, and on April 10th, it was in a location and at the optimum altitude to not only evade our national missile defenses, but if that had been a nuclear warhead and it detonated at that time, it would have put an EMP field over all 48 contiguous United States, causing the collapse of our electric grid and other civilian critical infrastructures that are necessary to sustain the lives of 320 million Americans. On April 16th, it passed over the Washington, D.C., New York City corridor, which is the optimal location for putting a peak EMP field down over Washington and New York, which are our political and economic capitals. And it would have collapsed the eastern grid had that been a warhead and they'd done a detonation. All you have to really do to end the United States as a civilization is to take out the eastern grid. We have 3 grids in this country: the eastern grid, the western grid, and the Texas grid. Texas has got their own grid. And if you take out the eastern grid, that's where most of our population lives, and 75% of our electricity is generated by the eastern grid. We can't exist as a nation without it. They were in a position to have done that if they had wanted to do a nuclear EMP attack back in April 16th of 2013. And on that very day that this satellite passed over the Washington, D.C., New York City corridor, there was a mysterious attack on a crucial facility in the western electric grid, on the Metcalf transformer substation outside San Jose, California, that surfaces the Silicon Valley. Apparently, there was a sabotage attempt by parties unknown, and we still have not apprehended them. And had they taken that down, you could have had a cascading blackout that could have caused, certainly it would have blacked out the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area, but it might have had cascading effects that could have taken down the whole western grid. Next view graph. A couple of months after the satellite, in July of 2013, we intercepted a North Korean freighter that was trying to get through the Panama Canal that was carrying missiles on board, SA2 nuclear-capable missiles. Depicted here is a freighter with a missile on it that depicts one of the nightmare scenarios for the Congressional EMP Commission was that instead of using a satellite or a long-range missile, the bad guys might come at us, with a freighter, because this way you could keep your fingerprints off the attack. You could hire terrorists, you could do it with a third party. It would be hard to locate a freighter that had launched a short-range missile against us because there's thousands of freighters in our waters all the time. And they appear to have, the Commission predicted the possibility of this as a theoretical threat, but it actually happened. It actually was practiced by North Korea, apparently, in July of 2013. Next view graph. This depicts the freighter, and it depicts the SA2 missiles that were found on that freighter that were hidden. They were in the hold, hidden under thousands of bags of sugar. Next view graph. On October 27th, 2013, the Knights Templars, their terrorist drug cartel in Mexico, attacked a grid in Mexico and put 420,000 people into the dark, so that they could go into the towns and villages and execute political leaders opposed to the drug trade. When Neanderthals, like the Knights Templars, have figured out the electric grid is a major societal vulnerability, what is Al-Qaeda capable of doing? What about ISIS, North Korea, Russia, China? All of them have developed a new doctrine. What we're looking at here is a new way of warfare that involves not just nuclear EMP attack, that's part of it, but it combines cyber attack, sabotage, and nuclear EMP is the ultimate weapon, non-nuclear radio frequency weapons used in coordination and combination to bring our country down. They write about this in their textbooks like Victor Slipchenko's, General Victor Slipchenko's No Contact War, a Chinese military textbook published by People's Liberation Army, called Ultimate Total Information Warfare. In their doctrine for cyber warfare and information warfare, it's not limited to computer bugs and hacking. It includes physical sabotage, non-nuclear radio frequency weapons, that is non-nuclear EMP, all the way up to nuclear EMP. And nuclear EMP is the ultimate kind of a threat that they would use in this. Next slide. Last June, on the 9th of June, while we were watching ISIS sweep over northern Iraq, this got very little reporting in the press. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula blacked out the whole country of Yemen. It's the first time in history that an entire nation has been blacked out by terrorist attack. This put 18 cities and 24 million people into the dark. Next view graph. That's a sign of one of the transmission towers. They did this by physical sabotage. Next. Pakistan was attacked in January 25th. That is Pakistan, yes. On January 25th of this year, 80% of Pakistan was blacked out. And they are a nuclear weapons state. So it's extremely disturbing that a nuclear weapons state was successfully blacked out, even for a short period of time, by terrorist actions. In April, Turkey was blacked out by a cyber attack from Iran. That too got little coverage. There was more press coverage on the fact that Washington, D.C. itself suffered a blackout from an explosion that happened in a transformer substation. That has been, that was just due to, the weakness of the grid, because our grid is an aging infrastructure, and so accidents happen. We're having a greater frequency of blackouts and the like. The bottom line here, what I'm trying to tell you, is that I think where we are today is analogous to where we were just before World War II. The bad guys have invented a new way of warfare, what they call a revolution in military affairs. Just the way the Nazis did before World War II. They had invented a new way of warfare called the Blitzkrieg, where for the first time in history, you put together armor, fast-moving infantry, mobile artillery, and air power used in combination, coordinated fashion, in a way that nobody had thought about doing it before. And the Blitzkrieg was such an effective revolution in military affairs that the Germans almost won World War II. They defeated all of the Allies from 1939 to 1941 in practically every battle and came very close to triumphing in the Second World War. The only way we defeated them was we had to use the blood of our soldiers in places like North Africa and the Russians in the East to learn how to do the Blitzkrieg better ourselves. Well, we may not have the opportunity to learn how to do their version of a total information warfare or a total cyber warfare when it happens, because the consequences would be so catastrophic that if you lose 90% of your population, there's no coming back from that. They have thought of a new way of warfare that combines cyber attack with physical sabotage, non-nuclear EMP weapons, and even exploiting severe weather. The attack might come out of a hurricane, for example, that puts a lot of stress on our electric grid. Now, what are we to do about this? Well, Congress, Washington has been trying for 7 years to pass a bill. The Critical Infrastructure Protection Act is one of those bills that's online now that hopefully will get passed this year. I would encourage you to urge your congressmen and senators to support the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act. However, the electric power lobby has been opposing any bill, and they have such great influence in Washington that they've been able to stop progress on protecting an electric grid. That's why we're still vulnerable. So I would not wait for Washington. On this issue and as on so many others, Washington is failing to do its job. It is possible for the states to protect themselves. One of the recommendations of the EMP Commission was that a state, that you can island the national grid. If you were to, we know how to protect against this. The good news part of this is we know about the technology. The Department of Defense has invented the surge arresters, the Faraday cages, blocking devices. It wouldn't cost that much to install them either. It's the politics of EMP that's been complicated. But a state, if it had installed these passive defenses on its grid, even though you're part of a larger regional grid, you could protect the grid here in Iowa, so that even if the rest of the regional grid went down, the lights would stay on in Iowa. Other states have taken initiatives. Maine, Virginia, Arizona, Texas now have all passed bills to move forward and not wait for Washington to protect their grids, but to do it on their own. I consider this in some respects an ominous development because it's reminiscent of the fall of the Roman Empire. In the late Roman Empire, when Rome could no longer defend its cities against the barbarians, the cities built walls themselves to defend themselves. So in a way, this is a scary analogy to what happened to the Romans, where Washington is unable or unwilling to defend the states. And so it's now falling to the states to provide for their own security, to build walls against the EMP and cyber barbarians of the 21st century. But it could also be a hopeful sign, because the founders never intended us to be ruled from Washington. Most of governance was supposed to happen from the state level. So perhaps this is an opportunity that's been handed to us by fate or chance or God for the American people to reassert an important part of their ability to provide for their own security and protect their own families. If Washington wants to surrender that power to the states, maybe we should welcome that development and do so. But I would also encourage you to think about starting right here in Iowa to protect yourselves, since Washington isn't doing the job. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. I saw about a week ago an online report published by Reuters, and Reuters emphasized that their information was not yet confirmed, but they said there was an unconfirmed report that North Korea had successfully launched ballistic missiles from a submarine, and of course this would give them the capability of putting subs off our west coast and our east coast and the Gulf Coast and launching them simultaneously for an EMP attack. Have you heard any information about whether this report has been confirmed?
Yes. What they have done is they've demonstrated the ability to cold launch a missile out of a submarine. The cold launching part is where they use compressed air to eject the missile, and then the first stage fires. And they did that part. It was a much more limited test. They didn't actually launch the missile to the full range, and so some in the Obama Defense Department are challenging the description that it was a true sub-launch ballistic missile launch. What they did demonstrate, though, is the ability to solve the most challenging technological parts of doing a launch from a ballistic missile submarine. And most experts think that this means that within a few years, North Korea will be able to actually put to sea ballistic missile submarines now. And by the way, the submarine they're doing that from is a Gulf-class submarine they got from the Russians. Our Russian friends and strategic partners have been working hand in hand, it seems, with North Korea and Iran to help them develop weapons of mass destruction to use against us. And that's another one of the ironic parts of this deal with Iran, that China and Russia are sitting on that same board that drew up this treaty. I wouldn't trust any agreement or treaty that was negotiated with those guys supposedly on our side. Yeah.
Stand up, please. Stand up.
Thank you. Larry Clayton, I've got a question that I hope is germane. It does deal with vulnerability. I understand that the military is developing a new division or branch of the military that's designed to deal with cyber things. Do you know anything about that?
Well, we have had, I don't know about a new one, although the Cyber Command is relatively new. I'm sorry, I haven't been able to turn my cell phone off. I don't know who is trying to call me. But Cyber Command is relatively new, but we do have a Cyber Command, which is part of the National Security Agency, and it's supposed to deal with cyber threats, but we define, that's one of the greatest vulnerabilities we have, which is a failure of strategic imagination. Our guys do not get it. The people that are drawing up our doctrine, our plans to protect us against cyber attacks don't understand this comprehensive new blitzkrieg strategy that I've been talking about, even though it's right in the open sources and you can read about it. When we think about protecting against cyber warfare, it's narrowly defined as computer bugs and viruses. It doesn't include physical sabotage. It doesn't include non-nuclear EMP weapons. It doesn't include nuclear EMP weapons, which is the most important thing of all. It doesn't even include the idea of doing a combined attack through severe weather. And it's this deficiency in our doctrine that could get us all killed, just the same way that 99% of the Western elites before World War II didn't understand the blitzkrieg. And they didn't listen to Winston Churchill and JFC Fuller and the handful of people who understood what the Germans were up to and what they were doing. We're in exactly that situation now, where not only do we have these technological vulnerabilities, but we have this enormous failure of strategic imagination where our side does not understand this threat and the way they would wage this war, even though they're obviously experimenting with it, the same way the Nazis did too. One of the things the Nazis did in 1938 is they tested the blitzkrieg out in the Spanish Civil War to make sure it would work before they went to the big one. That's what I think these small-scale attacks on places like Yemen and Mexico, Pakistan, Turkey, our ally, a NATO ally, Turkey, I think that's what they're doing. They're testing out the new blitzkrieg. Thank you.